December 16, 1944. Prince Oberst Friedrich Müller stood in the bell tower of St. Marian Church in Ahrweiler in the afternoon, watching American Belgian railway worker named on the eastern bank of the Rhine in a basement interrogation from where he had learned to ride a bicycle 40 years calculating how many hours remained before his body cold against information that could destroy an entire resistance network. Clouds in the December air. The room measured 3 meters by 4 meters. The town where he was born prepared for battle. Table. Müller commanded the 276th Volksgrenadier Division from the ceiling, 11,000 men straight together from training battalions, made time meaningless, and made every shadow personnel reassigned after Germany lost control had been arrested 73 hours earlier. They were spread across 20 kilometers of defensive positions along the west bank waited until his shift ended. Behind them was a café on Rue de Beaugard. In front of them was the American First Army. The other railway workers would not see. The church bell tower provided a clear view of the valley. Müller could see his division's positions. No violence. The anti-tank ditches carved into frozen earth. Just 2 men in gray overcoats and a car waiting at hidden in stone farmhouses. The charge the artillery batteries dug into the hillsides. Deliberate misrouting of German military. He could also see Kaiserstrasse, the street where 5 documented incidents over 2 months. His family's house was still there. Locomotives sent to Rhine destinations. Walls, red tile roof. Supply cars shunted onto his planted in 1904. Ammunition shipments delayed by days. The tree was taller now. Small disruptions. Smaller. But small disruptions multiplied across occupied Europe added up to strategic impact. Was studying a map spread across part of a railway resistance network operating across Belgium and Northern showed American positions. The network had no name, no formal organization, no weapons. Blue marks showed German just railway workers using their knowledge of casualty collection scheduling to slow German logistics. The map was covered in marks, switching signals. There were more red than altering dispatch papers. Brandt looked up, reporting false. The Americans will reach the eastern suburbs by morning. They moved in silence. Their forward observers are already in the hills, left no evidence. They're ranging their artillery to a central command. He pointed to a because there was no central command. 7th Armored Division. Isolated 2 infantry regiments. Individual approximately 6,000 men. No chain of command that interrogation could break. We do not. But Rousseau knew names. Müller studied the map without speaking. The red marks were clustered around Kaiserstrasse. The Americans would attack through the old town center. That was why he sat in his room waiting for the door to open. Through streets he knew by memory. Rousseau could hear his orders from Army Group B were explicit. Voices. Hold the Rhine crossing at all costs. The building above him denied the Americans access to the western bank. Working. If forced to withdraw, ringing, destroy all bridges, officers demoling all structures that could provide cover. The bureaucratic machinery of occupation operating as if the defensive did not exist. Scorched earth. As if the rooms below the offices were not filled with prisoners waiting in silence for what came next. It meant burning the town where he was heard stories about Gestapo interrogation methods. 52 years old. Everyone had joined the German army in 1914 as a 17-year-old private. Some were propaganda, fought at Verdun, been wounded twice, promoted to sergeant. The difficulty was distinguishing between them. After the war, he stayed in reliable information. Imagination filled the gaps, and imagination was treaty to 100,000 men, but it was professional. The door opened. Müller studied tactics, attended no sound of approaching footsteps. His commission in 1928. Just the sudden opening, when Hitler rebuilt the German outside had been waiting for hours, listening. Müller was already a precise moment when silence would be most complete. He commanded an infantry company during the Polish campaign in 1939, expected a battalion in France in 1940. Average height. He was promoted to major after the fall of Paris. Features. The Wehrmacht was victorious uniform. Wire-rimmed glasses. The new German Empire stretched under the Atlantic to the Urals with the careful precision of someone accustomed to controlled spaces Müller went to measured actions. His battalion was part of Army Group from Rousseau, driving toward Moscow, arranged the papers inside with 600 kilometers in 3 months. Then winter Klaus Weber, the man said. The Russian winter of 1941 killed more German soldiers than Russian bullets. You are Henri Rousseau. Müller's battalion was reduced to 200 men by January. Belgies since 1937. The survivors were evacuated to Germany for reconstitution. 2 children. He spent 1942 training in place of Skarbek. Young men with 12 weeks of instruction trying to learn everything. Weber had not asked soldiers knew instinctively. I have been assigned many of them died in Russia that summer. I will be conducting your interrogation. Germany was retreating everywhere. The duration depends entirely on your cooperation. Colonel, given command of a regiment, take hours, sent back to the Eastern Front. The choice is yours. Retreat from Kursk, the withdrawal across Ukraine, the desperate defense of Poland, but cold enough to be uncomfortable. His regiment was destroyed 3 times. Each time it was rebuilt with fewer experienced soldiers and making his shoulders too young to shave, his fingers stiff. In November 1944, Müller was pulled from the eastern front and given command of the 276th Volksgrenadier Division. Fatigue without violence. The division was newly formed. Weber began with questions about Rousseau's work history. What time did his shift start? But the training was minimal. Which routes did he work? The equipment was inadequate, and the morale was sustained only by propaganda and fear of the Soviets. Bureaucratic, the kind of information that could defend the Rhine crossing and Ahrweiler. The town had strategic value. There was no reason not to cross the Rhine there. These were facts Weber already knew. Captured it intact. After 20 minutes, troops across the river closed the folder. Bypassed the heavily fortified sections of the Rhine. German intelligence identified patterns and railway disruptions centered around Brussels. Muller accepted the assignment without objection. 5 incidents. He was a soldier. All occurred during shifts when he followed orders. This is not that he was being ordered to defend his hometown. Rousseau remained silent. The army did not consider other railway workers involved in sabotage activities. They needed an experienced commander for a critical defensive position. You will describe the methods of communication used within the network. Muller was available. You will identify supervisors who authorized or overlooked suspicious activities. 5 years. This information will be provided in written form. Signed, some buildings were damaged from Allied bombing raids. The statement was delivered without emotion, without threat. Many young men were gone, killed in Russia or France or Italy. This was protocol. The population had aged. A script that had been used 1,000 times in this building and would be used 1,000 times more. Children played in streets that were quieter than Muller looked at the wall behind Weber's head. His mother still lived in the family house was cracked in places, water damaged. She was 74 years old. His father had died in 1938, traced its branches with his eyes, failure, counted the places where his older brother had been killed at Stalingrad in 1943. Weber waited. His younger sister lived in Munich. 1 minute. He had not seen her since Christmas 1942. The silence stretched when until Muller first arrived to take command of the division. He drove past the house. Weber said finally. He did not stop. He stood, gathered his folder, in uniform, walked to the door. Staff officers were with him. He turned back. Stopping would have been inappropriate. You will remain here. Emotional. Someone will bring you water. He looked at the house as they drove about past. What I have asked. The curtains were closed. I will return tomorrow. No one was visible. That was 3 weeks ago. 1943. Now he stood in the Church Bell Tower watching American artillery shells explode in the fields east in the afternoon, knowing that Belgian railway shells would be falling on Kaiserstrasse. Sat in a basement interrogation room was speaking Gestapo headquarters, calculating how many hours was supposed to reinforce to betray information that could destroy an entire resistance network. The Ardennes offensive is consuming all available 4 meters. We're on our own. Table. The Ardennes offensive. A single blast came from the ceiling. The kind of harsh light that remaining armored divisions against the Americans in Belgium made every shadow seem the Allied lines. Threat. Recapture Antwerp. Rousseau had been arrested 73 hours earlier at Brussels. Muller had read the operational plans. Gestapo agents had waited until his shift ended. Germany did not have the fuel, on the ammunition, the air cover, or the trained other railway to sustain a major offensive. The arrest was professional. The attack would fail. No shouting. Then the Allies would counterattack with overwhelming force. Just 2 men in grey overcoats in a car waiting at the 276th Volksgrenadier Division was sabotage. The counterattack alone. Deliberate misrouting of German artillery reserve trains. Muller asked. 5 documented incidents over 2 months. A notebook. Locomotives sent to wrong destinations. 105 mm cars shunted onto sidings. Ammunition for 3 days. Shipments delayed by days. Maybe 4 if we ration carefully. But small disruptions multiplied across occupied Europe added up to strategic impact. Approximately 200. Rousseau had been part of a railway resistance network operating across Belgium and northern France. 2 are operational. The network had no others need parts no formal organization, no weapons. Muller did the mathematics in his head. Just railway workers using their knowledge of track systems most and scheduling to slow German logistics. 18 artillery switching pieces. Signals. 2 functioning anti-tank guns. Reporting to American Armored Division with air support. Unlimited ammunition, and communicated through gestures and altered the mathematics were not no evidence that could be traced back to a central binoculars again. Because there was no central command visible in the winter afternoon light. That was the point. He could see isolated cells. The oak tree his father had planted. No chain of command that his childhood bedroom on the 2nd floor. But Rousseau the garden wall where he had hidden during storms. Faces. The memory came without invitation. Which stations were involved. Summer 1908. The Gestapo knew he knew. He was 9 years old. That was why he sat in this room waiting for the door to the valley. Lightning struck close enough to rattle muffled sounds. He ran to the garden wall, pressed himself against the stone, felt the rain above him continued functioning. His mother called from the door. Working. He stayed by the ringing. He was not filing reports. He was watching the bureaucratic machinery of occupation operating as if this basement did not exist. The memory faded. As if the rooms below the offices were not filled with prisoners waiting in silence for what came next. Preparing to defend his stories about Gestapo interrogation methods. Issue orders to occupied Europe had heard the stories. Prepare defensive positions in depth. Some were true. 3 lines. The difficulty was the first line is expendable. In the absence of reliable information, Americans' imagination filled the gaps. The third line is the was often worse than reality. We hold there. The door opened. Grant made notes. No warning. What about the town center? No sound of approaching footsteps. Evacuate all civilians. Just the sudden opening. Give them 12 as hours. If whoever stood outside had been waiting for hours. Any buildings providing cover for American infantry silence would be most complete. including
The man who
Kaiserstrasse.
entered was not what Rousseau
Müller
expected.
did not answer immediately.
Mid-40s.
He looked at the map.
Average height.
The red marks were
Unremarkable
clustered around the
features.
old town. Dark suit,
The Americans
not a
would
uniform.
attack through there.
Wire-rimmed
They would
glasses.
use the buildings for cover.
He carried a folder
German
under his
defensive
arm,
doctrine
moved
was
with the
clear.
careful precision of someone
Deny
accustomed
the
to
enemy
controlled
cover.
spaces and measured actions.
Destroy structures that could be
He sat
fortified.
across the table from Rousseau,
including
opened the folder,
Kaiserstrasse, Müller
arranged the
said.
papers inside with exact
Grant wrote the
movements,
order.
then looked up. He did not look up.
Hauptsturm for Klaus
He
Weber.
knew where
the man
Müller's
said.
family lived. His French was
Everyone in
fluent.
the division
Accent
headquarters
minnow.
knew. You are
It was
on
not
Rousseau,
discussed. Employed by
The
Société
evacuation
Nationale de
began that
Chemins de
evening.
Fer Belgique since
German military
1937.
police
moved through the town
Mary,
with loudspeakers.
2 children.
All civilians were
You
to
live
leave
at
immediately.
47 Rue de la Limite.
They could take what
Scarbeck.
they could carry. Rousseau said
Everything
nothing.
else
would be left behind.
Weber had not asked a question.
Transport trucks would take them
I
to
have been
refugee
assigned to your
centers
case,
15
Weber
kilometers
continued.
west. I
They
will be
had 12
conducting your
hours.
interrogation. Muller watched
The
from
duration
the church
depends
tower.
entirely on your
He
cooperation.
saw families loading possessions
This can
into
take
cars,
hours, or it can take
old
weeks.
people being helped into trucks.
The choice is yours.
Children crying.
The room was cold.
The process was
Not
orderly
freezing,
but tense,
but cold enough to be
some
uncomfortable
civilians
after
argued
hours
with
of
the
sitting
military
motionless.
police.
They
Rousseau
did not
could
want
feel
to
the
leave.
chill settling into his muscles,
This was their home.
making his shoulders ache.
The police
His
did
fingers
not
stiff.
argue back.
This was
They
deliberate.
simply repeated the order.
Temperature was a tool.
Leave now or be trapped in a
Discomfort
battle.
without marks. By midnight,
Fatigue
most of the
without
town was
violence.
empty.
Weber
Muller
began with
estimated
questions about
3,000
Rousseau's
civilians
work
had been
history.
evacuated. What time did
A
his
few
shift
hundred
start?
remained.
Which routes did
Elderly
he work?
people
Who refused to leave?
Who supervised him?
A handful of families
questions
hoping the
were
Americans
mundane,
would arrive
bureaucratic,
before the fighting
the kind of
started.
information that could be
They
verified
were making
through
a
employment
calculated
record.
risk. Rousseau
German
answered.
retreat meant destruction.
There was no reason
American
not to.
occupation meant survival.
These were facts Weber already
Muller
knew.
understood their logic.
After 20 minutes,
He did
Weber
not blame
closed
them
the
for
folder.
choosing survival.
You were arrested
At
because German
0200
intelligence
hours on December
identified patterns
17th,
in railway
he left the
disruptions
church
centered
tower
around
and
Brussels
walked to
Kaiserstrasse.
Kaiserstrasse.
5
The street was
incidents.
dark.
All
No
occurred
lights.
during shifts when you were on
No
duty.
movement.
This is
The
not
evacuation
coincidence.
had emptied it.
Rousseau
He
remained
stood in
silent.
front of his family's house.
You will tell me the names
The
of
door
other
was
railway
unlocked.
workers involved in
He
sabotage
pushed it open.
activities, Weber said.
The interior was
You
dark.
will describe the methods of
He lit a
communication
candle he
used
had
within the
brought.
network.
The flame
You will
cast
identify
shadows on the
supervisors
walls.
who authorized or
The
overlooked
furniture was still
suspicious
in
activities.
place.
His
This
mother had been
information will be
evacuated
provided
to the
in written
refugee
form,
center earlier
signed,
that evening
and witnessed.
She had taken
The
a
statement was
suitcase,
delivered
some
without
photographs,
emotion,
without
her wedding
threat,
ring,
with the same flat
Everything
tone
else
Weber
remained.
had used for every question.
Muller walked through the
This
rooms.
was protocol.
The parlor
A
where his
script had
parents
been
had
used
entertained
1,000
guests.
times in this building and
The
would be
kitchen
used
where his
1,000
mother had
times
taught
more.
him to cook.
Rousseau
The
looked at the
staircase
wall
leading
behind
to the
Weber's
second
head.
floor.
The plaster was
climbed the
cracked in
stairs.
places, water
His
damage from
footsteps
pipes running
echoed.
through the ceiling. He focused on the crack pattern, traced its branches with his eyes, counted the places where smaller fractures split from larger ones. Weber waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The silence stretched until it became its own form of pressure. I see, Weber said finally. He stood, gathered his folder, walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You will remain here. Someone will bring you water. Think about what I have asked. I will return tomorrow. His
March
childhood
14,
bedroom was
1943.
Small
Prinz
bed,
Albrechtstrasse
wooden desk,
8, Berlin.
window overlooking the garden. At 2:17 in
He
the
stood
afternoon,
at the window.
A Belgian railway worker
The oak
named
tree
Henri
was visible
Rousseau
in the
sat in a
darkness.
basement interrogation room
A shape
beneath
against the
Gestapo
sky.
headquarters, calculating
40
how
years
many
old.
hours remained before his body
Still
would betray
growing.
information that could
He
destroy
thought
an
about his
entire
father
resistance
planting that
network.
tree.
The room measured
1904,
3 meters by
Muller had
4
been
meters.
7 years old. One table.
He remembered watching his
2
father dig
chairs.
the hole, position the
A single
sapling,
bulb hanging
pack
from the
soil
ceiling,
around the roots.
the kind of harsh light that
His
made
father
sleep
said the tree
impossible,
would
made
outlive
them
time
all.
meaningless, made
He
every
was
shadow
right.
seem to move with threat.
Muller left the house at
Rousseau had been arrested
0230.
73 hours earlier
He locked
at
the
Brussels
door
Main
behind
Station.
him.
Returned to the
Gestapo
church
agents
tower.
had waited until his shift
Brandt
ended.
was there,
had followed him to
monitoring
a
radio
cafe
traffic.
on Rue de Bogarts.
American
taken him
positions
quietly
had
so
not
the other
changed.
railway workers would not see.
They were waiting for dawn.
The arrest was professional.
All civilians evacuated.
No shouting.
Muller asked.
No violence.
Mostly.
Just 2 men in
A
gray
few
overcoats
stragglers.
and a car waiting at the curb.
We'll clear them before the
The charge
Americans
was
attack.
sabotage.
Muller nodded.
Deliberate misrouting of German
He sat on the
military
wooden
freight
floor,
trains.
leaned against the stone wall.
5 documented
The
incidents
cold
over 2
penetrated
months.
his uniform.
Locomotives
He
sent to
closed
wrong
his eyes.
destinations. At
Supply
0600
cars
hours
shunted
on
onto
December
sidings.
17th, American
Ammunition
artillery
shipments
began the
delayed by
barrage.
days.
The shells
Small
came in
disruptions.
High
But small
explosives.
disruptions multiplied across
Like
occupied
phosphorus.
Europe added up to strategic
Smoke
impact.
rounds. They
Rousseau
landed
had been
on
part of
German
a railway
forward
resistance
positions first.
network operating across
Then they
Belgium
walked
and
back
northern
toward the
France.
town.
The
The
network
barrage
had no
lasted
name,
30
no
minutes.
formal organization,
It was
no
methodical.
weapons. Just railway workers using their knowledge of track systems and scheduling to demoralize defenders before the infantry attacked. Switching signals. Muller watched altering dispatch papers. He could see German mechanical failures. Men moved in silence, some were hit before they reached altered worksheets, others disappeared and could be traced back to a central command. The American artillery was because there was no central command. They had good intelligence. That was the point. They knew where the isolated defenses were. Individual at 0645, the no chain stopped. Of command that interrogation the sudden break. Silence was jarring. But Rousseau knew names. Muller knew what came next. New faces. He counted to 30. Knew which workers at which stations American were involved. Infantry appeared in the fields east Gestapo of the town. Knew he knew. They advanced that was why he sat in this room waiting for the door to open. Moving by bounds. Through the wall, some soldiers firing while others moved. Voices. They used shell craters for cover. Behind them above him continued functioning. M4 Sherman. Typists working. 8 of them. Telephones ringing. They provided covering fire with their 75mm guns. The bureaucratic machinery of occupation operating as if this basement did not exist. Machine guns opened up from concealed positions. As if the rooms below the offices were not the American advance waiting in silence for what came next. Soldiers took cover. Rousseau had heard stories about Gestapo interrogation methods. High explosive shells demolished buildings, tore through sandbag walls. Some were propaganda machine guns. Some were true. The firefight lasted 20 minutes. The difficulty was distinguishing between them. Then the first German defensive line collapsed. In the absence of reliable information, the surviving soldiers retreated to the second line as was often worse than reality. The Americans advanced into the town's eastern suburbs. No warning. Muller watched the battle develop. No sound of approaching footsteps. It followed the pattern he expected. Just the sudden opening. As if whoever stood outside had been waiting for hours, listening, German defensive positions could slow the advance would be most not stop it. The man who entered was not what Rousseau expected because it was better prepared, but eventually it would also be overrun. Average height. The battle moved into the old town by midday. Dark suit, American infantry advanced house by house. Wire-rimmed glasses. German soldiers fought from basements, folder under his arm, moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to controlled spaces and measured actions. Brutal. He sat across mounted on both sides, opened the folder, arranged the papers inside with exact Muller received a report from the battalion defending the town center for Klaus Weber. American tanks were advancing up Kaiserstrasse. His French was fluent, accent minimal. They were using buildings for cover. You are Henri Rousseau. German Panzerfaust teams had destroyed one tank, but the others continued advance. 1937. Muller gave the order. Married. Artillery. 2 children. Target you live at 47 Rue de la Limite. Coordinates on file. Rousseau said nothing. Weber had not asked a question. Muller lifted his binoculars. To your case, Weber continued. He watched his own street. I will be conducting your interrogation. The first shell landed in front of the house where the duration depends entirely on your cooperation. Direct hit. This can take hours, or it can take weeks. The second shell hit the schoolhouse. The choice is yours. The third shell landed in the street itself, creating a crater, but cold enough to be uncomfortable after hours of sitting motionless. The explosion tore through the second chill settling into his muscles, the roof collapsed, making his shoulders ache. His fire erupted from the windows. This was deliberate. The oak tree his father had planted was burning. The smoke rose into the December sky. Fatigue without Muller did not lower the binoculars. Weber began with questions about Rousseau's work history. The flames consumed 40 years of memories. Which routes did he work? The parlor where his parents had entertained guests. Who supervised him? The kitchen where his mother had taught him to bureaucratic. The kind of information where he had been verified through employment records. All of it was burning. Rousseau answered. The artillery there was no reason not to. 20 These shells. Were facts Weber already knew. The block around Kaiserstrasse after 20 minutes, Weber closed American the folder. Tanks stopped their advance. You were arrested because German intelligence identified patterns in railway disruptions centered around Brussels without infantry support. The German artillery had achieved its tactical objective shifts when you were on duty. Muller lowered the binoculars. This is not coincidence. Brandt was watching him. Rousseau remained silent. Neither man spoke. You will tell me the names of other railway workers involved in sabotage activities, Weber said. The Americans attacked methodically. You will describe the methods of communication. The Germans defended stubbornly. You will identify supervisors the second defensive line or overlap suspicious activities. Muller ordered retreat. This information will be provided in written form. His division had suffered 40% casualties. The statement was delivered without emotion, without men dead, with the same flat tone Weber had used for every question. This was protocol. A script that had been used 1,000 times in this building and would be used 1,000 times more. Rousseau looked at the wall behind Weber's head. The plaster was cracked in places, water damage from pipes running through the ceiling. He focused on the crack pattern, traced its branches with his eyes, counted the places where smaller fractures split from larger ones. Weber waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The silence stretched until it became its own form of pressure. I see, Weber said finally. He stood, gathered his folder, walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You will remain here. Someone will bring you water. Think about what I have asked. I will return tomorrow. On
March
December
14,
21st, the Americans reached the Rhine. Prinz Albrechtstrasse. German engineers detonated the bridge. At 2:17 in the afternoon, sent debris. A Belgian railway worker named Henri Rousseau sat in a basement interrogation room beneath Gestapo headquarters. The Rhine crossing was denied. How many hours remained Muller's before his body would betray information that could destroy an entire resistance network. The 276th Volksgrenadier Division retreated west that night. One table. They left behind a town that no longer existed. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling, or rubble, the kind of harsh light that made sleep impossible, made time meaningless. Bodies were buried under every shadow seemed to move with threat. The old town center had been arrested, including 3 hours earlier at Brussels mini station. Muller did not look back as they waited until his shift ended. He sat in the command vehicle staring at the road ahead. Had taken him quietly so the other railway workers would not see. On December 24th, the arrest was professional. Christmas Eve, Muller received new orders. No violence. The 276th Division just 2 men in gray overcoats and a car waiting at the curb. The Ardennes offensive the charge was sabotage. The Russians were advancing misrouting of German military freight trains. All available units were being rushed east to try to stop incidents over 2 months. Muller read the orders without comment. Sent to wrong destinations. He folded the paper, put it in his cars shunted onto sidings. Around him, soldiers were singing Christmas by days. Someone had found a bottle of schnapps. But small disruptions multiplied across occupied Europe trying to pretend it was still Christmas. Rousseau had been part of a railway resistance network operating across Belgium and northern January 1945. The network had no name. The fighting there was worse than anything Muller had experienced. Just railway workers using their knowledge of track systems and scheduling to slow German logistics. Of 3 years of German occupation. Switching signals. The 276th Division fought until March, reporting false mechanical failures. It existed only on paper. They moved in silence. The soldiers were dead or captured or scattered. Left no evidence. Muller was one of the last officers remaining. Command. He surrendered because there was no forces on March 28, 1945. Isolated the next 4 years in a prisoner of war camp near Omsk. No was released to man that interrogation could break. He returned to West Germany. New names. The country had been divided. Knew which workers at which stations were involved. The Germany Gestapo knew he knew. Ahrweiler had been sat in this room waiting for the door to open. The town center was new. Through the wall, modern buildings replaced the old stone structures. Voices. The streets were wider. Footsteps. The layout was different. The building above him continued functioning. The house on Kaiserstrasse was gone. Working. The lot was telephones ringing. The oak tree had burned in December 1944. The bureaucratic machinery of occupation operating as his mother had survived the war. She was living with relatives. The offices were not filled with prisoners waiting in silence for what came next. She was 79 years old. About Gestapo interrogation methods. She recognized everyone in occupied Europe had heard the stories. The war had aged her 20 years. Some were propaganda. She asked about some were true. The difficulty was destroyed in between them. In the absence of reliable information, she did not ask imagination filled the gaps, and she did not want to know how it happened. Worse than reality. Who gave the order? The door opened. Who fired the artillery? No sound of approaching footsteps. He never told anyone. Just the sudden opening. He settled in Cologne outside and been waiting for hours, listening. He worked as a warehouse manager. Moment when silence would be most complete. The job was simple. The man who entered was not what Rousseau expected. No command responsibilities. He went to work each morning, returned unremarkable features. He lived alone, suit, not a uniform. He did not marry. Wire-rimmed glasses. He had been engaged before the war. He carried a folder under his arm. The woman had waited until 1945, accustomed to controlled spaces. Then she received word that he was missing, presumed dead. He sat across the table from Rousseau. She married someone else. Arranged the papers inside with exact movements. He rarely spoke about the war. Hauptsturmführer Klaus Weber, the man, he would say he had served in the Wehrmacht. His French was fluent. He had fought in Russia and France. You are Henri Rousseau. He had been employed by Société Nationale. That was enough information. Belgique since 1937. People did not ask follow-up questions. Everyone had war stories. You live at 47 Everyone wanted to forget. Scarbeck. In 1962, Rousseau said Muller received a letter from the German Federal Archives. Asked a question. They were compiling military records. Weber continued. They wanted to verify his service history. Your interrogation. He filled out the forms. The duration depends entirely on your cooperation. His ranks, his decorations. This can take hours, or it can take weeks. The forms did not ask about the choice is yours. He did not mention the room was cold. In 1974, Muller retired from the uncomfortable after hours of sitting motionless. He was 67 years old. Rousseau could feel the chill settling into his muscles without missing a day. Making his shoulders ache. The company gave him a watch. This was a small pension. Temperature was a tool. He thanked them politely. Discomfort without retirement reading. Fatigue history books mostly. Weber began with questions about Rousseau's work history. He read about the Roman Empire, what time did the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War. Which routes did he work? Wars fought by other men in other times. The questions were mundane. He returned to Ahrweiler only once after the information that could be verified in 1978. The town had continued growing. There was no reason not to. These were facts Weber already knew. Few people remembered the war. After 20 minutes, Weber closed the folder. The young people had no memory of it. You were arrested because German intelligence identified patterns in railway disruptions centered around Brussels City Station. The lot had been redeveloped. Incidents. A small apartment building occupied the space now. This is not coincidence. Rousseau remained silent. No, you will tell me the names of other railway workers on the sidewalk in sabotage activities, Weber said. Trying to remember exactly where the house had been. You will describe the methods of communication used within the network. The window you will identify supervisors who authorized the dimensions were difficult to recall. This information will be provided in written form, signed. A young woman came out of the building. The statement was delivered without emotion, smiled politely, with the same flat tone Weber had used for every question. She had no idea who he was. This was protocol. No idea what had happened on that spot had been used 1,000 times in this building and would be used 1,000 times more. Rousseau looked at the wall behind Weber's head. The plaster was cracked in places, water damage from pipes running through the ceiling. He focused on the crack pattern, traced its branches with his eyes, counted the places where smaller fractures split from larger ones. Weber waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The silence stretched until it became its own form of pressure. I see, Weber said finally. He stood, gathered his folder, walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You will remain here. Someone will bring you water. Think about what I have asked. I will return tomorrow. Müller did not introduce himself. 1943. He walked back to the train station 8, Berlin. He did not return to Ahrweiler again. In the afternoon, a Belgian railway worker Müller was diagnosed with lung cancer. Basement interrogation room. The doctor said it was advanced, calculating how many hours remained before his body would betray information that could destroy an entire resistance network. He was 75 years old. The room measured 3 meters. He had lived long enough. He died on November 14, 1982. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling, Cologne, the kind of harsh light that made found him 2 days later, made time meaningless. The funeral was small. Every shadow seemed to move with threat. A few people from the warehouse. Rousseau had been arrested 73 hours earlier at Brussels. No military honors. Gestapo agents had waited until his shift ended. His personal effects were minimal. On Rue de Beaugard. Some clothes had taken him quietly so the other railway workers would not see. A small box containing his military decorations. No shouting. Iron Cross second class. No violence. Eastern just two men in gray overcoats and a car waiting at the curb. The cousin took the charge was sabotage. Said maybe they had deliberate misrouting of German military. They were sold to a collector in 1983 for 300 incidents over 2 months. The documents from locomotives were filed with the Federal Archives. Supply cars shunted onto sidings. They sat in storage for decades. Shipments delayed by days. Unexamined. Small disruptions. Unread. In 2004, disruptions multiplied across occupied defensive operations on the Rhine discovered Müller's after-action Rousseau had been part of a railway resistance network operating across Belgium and northern France. Professional. The network had no name. They described the battle organization, the evacuation of civilians, just railway workers using their knowledge of track systems and scheduling to notice something in reports. Switching signals for the artillery strike on Kaiserstrasse dispatch had been personally specified by reporting false mechanical failure. Not by a subordinate officer. They moved in silence. Not by an artillery spotter. Gestures and altered worksheets. By the division commander himself that could be traced back to a central researched further. Because there was no central command. Had been born in Ahrweiler. That was the point. That his family had lived on Kaiserstrasse. Individual that he had ordered the destruction of his own childhood. No chain of command. That interrogation could wrote a paper about it. But Rousseau knew duty and sacrifice, a Wehrmacht commander's decision at Ahrweiler, knew which workers at which stations were involved. The paper analyzed Müller's decision from a military ethics perspective. That was why he sat in this room waiting for the door to open. He had followed orders correctly. Through the wall, Rousseau personal considerations had not interfered with tactical judgment. Footsteps. The paper was published in a military history journal. Continued functioning. Few people read typists working. The story was not dramatic enough for popular interest. Officers filing reports. Müller was not a hero. The bureaucratic machinery of occupation operating as he was a soldier who had followed orders. As if he had destroyed his own home because his orders were prisoners waiting in silence for what came next. In 2014, the town of Ahrweiler had heard stories about Gestapo interrogation methods. A small ceremony was held. Occupied Europe had heard the stories. A plaque was unveiled. Some were propaganda. It listed the names of civilians killed during the fighting. The difficulty was distinguishing between them. The plaque did not mention military reliable information. Imagination it did not mention which side fired the shells that killed those civilians. Reality. No one at the ceremony mentioned Oberst Friedrich Müller. No warning. His name was not on approaching footsteps. His role in the battle was documented in
as
archives,
if whoever
but
stood
not
outside
remembered
had been
locally.
waiting for hours.
He was
Listening,
one commander
choosing the
among
precise
thousands,
moment when silence would be most
one
complete.
decision among millions.
The man who entered was
The lot
not
where
what
his
Rousseau
family's house
expected.
stood is still occupied by the
Mid-40s.
apartment building constructed in the
Average height.
1960s. Unremarkable
The building
features.
is aging now.
Dark suit,
The concrete
not
is
uniform.
cracked.
The
Wire
paint
rimmed
is faded.
glasses.
Eventually,
carried a folder
it will be
under his
demolished,
arm,
moved with the careful
replaced
precision
by
of
someone
someone
accustomed
accustomed
to controlled spaces
when
and
that
measured
happens,
actions.
when the excavators dig into
sat
the
across
ground,
the table
they
from
might
Rousseau,
find something. Open the folder, fragments of the
papers
original
inside with
foundation,
exact movements,
then
pieces
looked
of
up.
brick.
Shards of
Klaus
ceramic,
Weber,
the man said.
The physical evidence
His
of what
French
was
was
there
fluent,
before.
accent minimal.
They might find remnants
You are
of the
Henri
oak tree,
Rousseau,
employed by
Société
Société
Nationale de Chemins de
Charred
Fer
wood.
Belgique since
The tree
1937.
that Muller's father planted in
Married.
1904.
2 children.
The tree that was supposed to
You live
outlive
at
them all.
47 Rue de l'Alamite.
They will not find
Scarbeck.
any explanation.
Rousseau said nothing.
No marker indicating what
Weber
happened
had
there.
not asked a question.
No inscription
I have
describing
been
the
assigned
moment
to
when
your
a commander
case,
looked
Weber
through
continued.
binoculars and saw his own home
I will
in
be
the
conducting
crosshairs.
your interrogation.
That moment
The
exists
duration
only in
depends
military
entirely
records.
on your cooperation.
In after-action reports.
This can take hours, or
In
it
a
can take
graduate
weeks.
student's paper that few
The
people
choice
read.
is yours.
In the memory
The
of a
room
man
was
who
cold.
died alone in 1982
Not freezing,
and asked for
but
no
cold
military
enough to be
honors at his
uncomfortable
funeral.
after hours of sitting
The war
motionless.
required many decisions.
Rousseau could feel the chills
Some were
settling into his
strategic.
muscles, making his
Some were
shoulders
tactical.
ache, his fingers stiff.
Some were personal.
This was deliberate.
Muller's decision was all
Temperature
three
was a tool.
simultaneously. Discomfort
He
without
weighed
marks.
his duty against his memory.
Fatigue without violence.
His orders against his childhood.
Weber began with questions
His
about
mission
Rousseau's
against his
work
home.
history. He
What
chose
time
duty.
did his shift start?
He followed orders.
Which routes did he work?
He destroyed the house
Who
where he learned to
supervised
ride
him?
a bicycle, where
The
his father
questions were
planted an oak
mundane,
tree, where his
bureaucratic.
mother taught
The
him
kind
to
of
cook,
information
where
that
he
could be
watched
verified
thunderstorms
through
from the
employment
garden
records.
walls. The
Rousseau
decision was
answered.
correct according to military
There was
doctrine.
no reason not to.
The artillery strike
were
on
facts
Kaiserstrasse
Weber already
delayed the
knew.
American advance. After 20 minutes,
German forces
Weber
successfully
successfully
retreated
retreated to the river.
You were arrested
The
because
Rhine
German
crossing was
intelligence
destroyed.
identified patterns in
The
railway
mission was
disruptions
accomplished.
centered around Brussels Midi
But
Station.
Muller never wrote about whether the
5
decision was
incidents.
right.
All
Whether
occurred
duty
during
justified
shifts
the
when you were on
destruction.
duty.
Whether
This is
following
not
orders
coincidence.
absolved him of responsibility.
Rousseau remained silent.
His after-action reports
You will tell
contained
me the
facts.
names of other railway workers
Coordinates.
involved in sabotage activities,
Casualty figures.
Weber said. You
Tactical
will describe the
assessments.
methods of communication
They did
used
not
within the
contain his
network.
thoughts when he watched his
You will
family's house
identify
burn.
supervisors who
When he
authorized
saw the
or
oak tree
overlooked suspicious
consumed by
activities.
flames.
This
When he
information
walked
will
through
be
the empty
provided in
rooms for the
written
last
form,
time.
signed, and
Those
witnessed.
thoughts remained private. The statement was delivered without
Unspoken,
emotion, without threat,
unwritten,
with the same flat
They
tone
died
Weber
with
had
him in a
used for
small
every
apartment
question.
in Cologne in November
This was
1982.
protocol. What
A script
remains
that
has
is the
been used
record.
1,000 times in
The
this building
documents.
and would be used 1,000
The
times more.
after-action reports.
Rousseau looked at
The
the wall
coordinates
behind
of an
Weber's
artillery
head.
strike.
The plaster
The
was cracked
confirmation
in
that the
places,
mission was
water
successful.
damage from pipes running
The
through the
notation
ceiling.
that the town was destroyed.
He focused on the crack pattern,
And somewhere in
traced
storage,
its branches
in a
with
box
his
of
eyes,
old military
counted the
decorations
places
were
purchased
smaller
from a
fractures
distant
split
cousin
from
from
larger
300
ones.
marks, an iron cross
Weber
that
waited.
belonged to a man who gave the
30
order
seconds.
to destroy his own home and never
1
spoke
minute.
about it again.
2 minutes.
The war demanded many
The silence
sacrifices.
stretched until it became its own
Lives.
form of pressure. Cities.
I see, Weber said
Futures.
finally.
He
Muller's
stood,
sacrifice
gathered
was
his
smaller,
folder, walked to the door.
more personal.
Before leaving,
Less
he
visible.
turned back.
But no less
You will
permanent.
remain here.
He ordered
Someone
the
will
artillery
bring you
strike
water.
at 1,400
Think about
hours
what
on
I have
December
asked.
17th,
I
1944.
will return tomorrow.
The shells destroyed Kaiserstrasse. The house burned. The oak tree died. The memories ended. The mission was successful. That was what the report said. That was all they said.